All right, hello. Welcome to How Salesforce Builds Salesforce using Heroku. I'm Lyric Hartley. I'm a customer solutions architect at Heroku, which means I help our VIP customers use Heroku to the greatest extent, help them with their architecture, things like that. And one of my primary focuses is our biggest customer, Salesforce. So I spend a lot of time working with Salesforce teams, helping them utilize Heroku in conjunction with several other people at Heroku. So the safe harbor, I don't think I actually say anything that matters safe harbor-wise, but it feels obligatory to always say that, that make your purchases based on things that are currently existing. You've probably heard this 1,000 times already. So what I'm going to talk about is what is Heroku, for those who don't know, to give some context. Why does Salesforce love Heroku? And some of the patterns of usage that I see within Salesforce, and how they're getting the most out of it, and then leave some time for Q&A. So who here currently uses Heroku? Is there a fair amount? Okay. And then, so of those, who use Heroku and Salesforce together as opposed to independently? So it looks like most actually use it with Salesforce combined. So to get an idea, for those who aren't familiar with Heroku, as to where we fit in the Salesforce ecosystem, we're over here on the extend. So if you were going along the no code, low code, and more code, we're sort of more on this side, hanging out over here with Force.com. A bit different than Force.com, and I'll say something about that in just a minute. But it's worth noting the extend, because that'll be a little bit of a theme, because a lot of what Salesforce utilizes Heroku for is extending core functionality, doing things off the org that they couldn't do on the org. So this is kind of what I was alluding to. If you're moving from the right side here towards the left, then you're sort of getting towards the more code, not only more code, but more management. So on this side is where you'd be sort of in the Force.com, the SaaS space. And then as you start moving that way, you get into the platform where we are, Heroku, platform as a service. And then you get to things like AWS and on-prem. Often people start on the on-prem and they kind of try to move this direction. And I would advocate that everybody try to start on this side and move that way, so that you're doing as much for your business objectives, more so than managing things that you don't care about. Most people don't care about what distro of Linux they're running, unless they really have some specific stuff. So where we extend, and this is back to the extend, is that when you're on this side of the Service Cloud, and then you need to extend that further, the next place is Heroku. Here's kind of the elevator pitch for Heroku, cloud platform that lets companies build, deliver, monitor, and scale apps. The fastest way to go from idea to URL, and that's an important piece, because that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get from the idea to the actual delivered something. So normally you would make these kind of decisions. You would have this idea, you would decide, okay, am I going to use AWS? Where am I going to deploy this stuff? What distros am I going to use? Am I going to use containerization? What am I going to use for my storage? You're going to have to think through your networking, load balancing, any of that kind of stuff, your logging infrastructure. With Heroku, you just git push, you deploy it, you're off to the races. Manage it, add add-ons. You don't have to set up those add-ons, but you can add them to your apps, quite easily, and then scale it. So then you can take it from your proof of concept, from that idea, and then scale it to the size scale that Salesforce needs. Just some numbers about Heroku: 11 billion requests per day, 5 million apps, and 150 add-on services. These add-on services are things like other types of databases or whatever. If you wanted to add Mongo or any types of other add-ons, we have a ton of add-ons that you could add into there. The reason this is interesting for Salesforce is, one, that the number of requests, it means that we can manage the scale that Salesforce needs to run the size products that they need to, and also that we have enough of these add-ons to make it cheap and easy to try out new ideas and to run through proof of concept and do rapid prototyping. I'm going to mention a few features of Heroku, not to get too deep into all of Heroku. It's not a Heroku 101, but just some of these because I'll mention them later because they get heavily utilized by Salesforce. One is private spaces. I'm not sure if you guys have watched any private spaces talks so far or not, but the basic idea of a private space is that it's under the covers, it's a VPC, if you're familiar with the AWS lingo. It's a virtual private cloud, and then you get sort of your own private Heroku inside there. So you're network isolated from everything else, and so you get that additional security. You get outbound static IP addresses, you get inbound controls to control what IP ranges can talk to that space, and we leverage that a lot at Salesforce. Pretty much all of them run in private spaces. And then the data services. So if you did have data that you were storing there, that gets put into a VPC that gets peered to the other one. So then that's network isolated as well. Again, this is important for us for security reasons. Connect is one that comes up a lot too. If you're not familiar with Connect, the quick and dirty would be that it's for bidirectional syncing of your Salesforce data to a Postgres database within Heroku. And that's, you can use it, you can do that for a number of different things, and I'll talk about one of them. We use it as a lot for integration, also extension, but integration tends to be a pretty common pattern for using Connect. Heroku Flow, this comes up in our continuous delivery. This is, again, around rapid prototyping, getting things out there quick. To give you the real quick idea of Heroku Flow, if I was in Git and I wanted to make a new feature, I checked it out, I created a new feature branch. Whenever I create the pull request for that, I'll get a review app down there. So my teammates or whatever can review that, and when they review it, and when it gets merged, that app will automatically get deleted. And then master will get deployed for me, if I've configured it that way. Master will get deployed for me into my next environment. And then as I get down the road here, since again, because of Salesforce, because of our strict requirements on security and things and release management and separation of duties, then we can let people like release managers do these promote to production. And if you notice this little pentagon there beside that one, I guess it's a pentagon. That is an icon for a private space. So that means that production app is actually in a private space, even though some of these others aren't. So that can be managed by a different team, and me as a developer might not have access to that at all. Again, working on the security concerns, but also keeping things rapid. So what does Salesforce need, basically from Heroku, and why do they love us? Well, they love Heroku because we meet so many of those needs so easily. So security obviously is a major concern. Agility and development speed. This is something that teams internal to Salesforce can sometimes struggle with because if you're trying to rack more hardware, that slows things down. With Heroku, they can fire it up and they can get going. Scalability, if you're going to build this service, you want to make sure you can actually scale it out to the needs of a company the size of Salesforce. Integration, we have lots of acquisitions that we try to integrate with, as well as legacy services and things like that. And then extending the orgs. There's something you want to do on the org, but you can't actually do it on the org, so you need to do it somewhere else and put it back. So I'll say a little bit about the security. As I'm sure you're aware, trust is number one for us. We spend a lot of time thinking about trust and security. And part of this I've mentioned already, but the things that we leverage, or a few of the things that we leverage in Heroku for trust compliance would be, of course, the private spaces for network isolation, trusted IP ranges. Some of the apps we limit to only VPN pool IPs, so you can only access those apps if you're behind the VPN. Static IPs, of course, because we do whitelisting with anything we talk to. In many cases, we do mutual SSL, so there's just that extra layer. If you're not familiar with mutual SSL, you could think about it like a poor man's VPN tunnel. Add-on whitelisting, this is so that teams, they're only using Heroku add-ons that have been vetted by our trust department so that we keep our surface area under control. And fine-grained access to controls, only give people permission to things they should have permission to. A few of the trust applications that are running on Heroku that you might find of interest, if you've used Salesforce Authenticator, which used to be Twofer, they actually run in a private space on Heroku. We run some data protection services. We do some network monitoring of logs, both at the application layer and for a network layer. Do that processing off in Heroku and then feed that stuff back into our trust areas. The status page, the trust.salesforce.com, is now on Heroku. And then we stage attacks against ourselves from Heroku. Agility, one that comes to mind, Trailhead, as I'm sure everybody is very aware of. Trailhead runs on Heroku. It's a Rails app that runs on Heroku. And the reason I put this one under agility, it could have gone under a few, but they would have not have gotten as far as quickly had they not been running Rails on Heroku. They were just able to really quickly iterate on things and get to where they are. A little bit about their infrastructure. So they have their front-end web dynos, and then they use a bunch of back-end worker processes to do things like when you're doing challenges and badges and all that sort of thing. Most of that stuff is stored in Redis along with session data. You can kind of see it there. And then there's a few additional add-ons, but they also use, you can see the little box for Connect. They also use Connect to, well, not necessarily for the identity part, but they will use Connect to sync up some of that data back into the respective org for where you are in those challenges and how much you've completed. So S1 org chart, this is the Salesforce 1 org chart. The reason I put this one under agility, this one also could have been under integration as well, is that we actually built, the first time we built this, we built it as a native mobile app, and it was built pre-Salesforce 1. So then when Salesforce 1 came out, it was like, oh, well, we need to build this in order to fit into Salesforce 1. Well, if we had had to go spin up the various things that we needed to make that transition, it would have taken us a lot more time. Instead, we were able to use our Node and Angular backend code that we were using before to leverage that and quickly deploy it as a Salesforce 1 app. So it's actually, I don't know if has anyone used Canvas? Has anybody used Canvas for anything? Okay. So Canvas is, if you're not familiar with Canvas, it's just kind of like an iframe to somewhere else. So you can have, you can present something in your org, either on a tab or through S1 in this case, but it actually lives somewhere else. And in this case, it lives on Heroku, and then uses Connect to get the data from the Salesforce org, and then present that in S1. And actually have a little demo of this so you can see how well it fits together. Let's see if I can show you this.
The new Salesforce 1 org chart app in the 62 org lets you see different levels of hierarchy within the company. Your homepage is a direct view of your personal organization. Simply search for a colleague.
And all this is calling back to Heroku.
Scroll all the way up and down their management chain. Swipe to see peers. And even email or call them directly from the app. Or click on their picture to see their full profile. Get a quick and easy view of any team org with the org chart app. It's easy to get started. Join the Salesforce 1 mobile enablement group on Chatter.
And really the reason I wanted you to see that is that it's hard to tell that it's not native. So the reason that's interesting is because you get a lot of power, at least for us, because our release cycles are such that if you wanted to get into an org release cycle, it takes a lot longer. However, you can iterate extremely fast. If you're using Canvas and you're actually running on Heroku, then you can deploy daily, multiple times a day without impacting what else is going on within the org. And then your users don't even know. Like, people were amazed when we released this because we could turn around bug fixes, within hours. And they're like, how did that happen? There's not another release cycle for, a week. And it's because we were doing it this way. Scalability, there's a couple I'll mention here because they're a huge scale. Thunder, as I'm sure you've heard about the IoT cloud, they make heavy use of Heroku. They're probably one of our biggest, well, they are our biggest consumer of Kafka for sure, and they're one of our biggest users in general. And then they leverage some of our other services. But I just want to get to some of the others so I don't run out of time. Einstein, they started building out some of their services there, again for scalability and extendability. Integration. So we extend the org through quoting and leads. So if you go to www.salesforce.com and you start filling out something, there's a system that'll flow through for creating those leads that then eventually, as it gets deduped and compared with other systems, ends up in our corporate org. And I'll show you a diagram of what that looks like here in just a second. Data analysis, so we pull all the sales data out of the org, run a bunch of analysis in Heroku, and figure out how to divide sales territories, and then feed that back in so that our salespeople know what their new territories are. AI, kind of like with the like with Einstein, but with some of the others as well. Middleware is a common one, like you've got something on this end, you need to manipulate it and then get it into your Salesforce org. So sitting there in the middle, that's a very common pattern at Salesforce. The open source collaborators is a kind of a different animal. So this would be this is really the dev pipeline, but this is what it looks similar for production. So the lead intakes come in through www. Content that comes through those various things, but then we have our other services in Heroku that reach out, interact with other systems, and then bring that stuff back in, and then eventually feed it back into the Salesforce org. This is a pretty common pattern for this type of extension. This one is a little different. This one's extending, but using Connect. So one of the problems that we were trying to solve is that we had, as you're probably aware, we've had a lot of acquisitions. Many of those acquisitions have their own Salesforce org. So how do you do reporting across those things? How do you look for opportunities that may impact multiple clouds? So if you've got this acquisition and this one, and they may have products that are complementary, how do you make that stuff work together? Or how do you just even do reporting across all of it? So what we do is we have, in Heroku, we have Connect set up to each one of those different orgs. Brings in that data into a central Postgres database, and then we can run our queries and stuff across that, and then we can get information across the entirety of Salesforce, as entirety of the company, which before that was a very, very labor-intensive process, and that often didn't happen because somebody over here would export something, somebody over here would export something, and it would fall apart. Now it's quite easy. Now it just happens on its own. Concierge, this one I can speak more to. This was the team I was on before I moved to Heroku. So Concierge is our internal app for, it's like your one-stop shop. So many of you probably have dealt with or are currently dealing with, you have a lot of different systems, and you have to go to this one for HR stuff, and you go to this one for your IT tickets, and you go to this one for something else. And when you're trying to find information, you go to yet another. So we created Concierge to kind of integrate all of those and make it seamless for our employees. So you can search information. There's live chat where you can talk to our help desk, our ticketing system, and then our content stays up to date through a curation system. So this is kind of what it looks like. You can search for whatever you want, whatever trouble you're having. It's open-ended, and then we'll try to find it within the Salesforce internal ecosystem. And then also your tickets and anything you favorited. So I'll give you kind of an idea. So if I search for VPN, I might get this troubleshooting a slow VPN connection. Maybe that looks like what I want. I can at this point either go to the live chat or I can create a ticket. And if I create a ticket, it's going to use all the information it knows about my searching history to pre-populate those tickets to kind of move things faster. The reason I'm highlighting these is because you'll see that it's integrating a lot of different pieces to make those all fit together. And I don't think we could have done that effectively without using Heroku. So here's kind of actually those pieces that get used. So Salesforce 1 for the mobile pieces, Service Cloud, all our ticketing, of course, the identity. Well, the node bits, those are our, the app itself on Heroku. There is some Force.com that glues stuff together. Heroku SSO, private spaces, and of course for security. And then we're moving towards Elasticsearch and Connect. This is what the current architecture looks like. It's a bit of a simplified version, but so basically there's two private spaces. There's a public-facing private space, so that'll allow people hitting the mobile client and the desktop client. But then that space talks to a private space that's a back-end space that is restricted both by IP and mutual SSL to only talk to the front end. So no one can ever get to the back-end services from there. And then from there, it actually goes back further into the DMZ to reach in for the GSA currently. And so then those are mutual SSL and of course firewalled. And then it reaches out to several different orgs. And then it'll aggregate, so if you had tickets that were human resource tickets and you had IT tickets, then it'll bring all those together into a single view. And the reason that's nice is because cross-org stuff, if you've ever had to deal, I don't know, how many people have a number of orgs, like more than one org? Then you've probably dealt with some of the cross-org, how do I get data from here to here, and how do I keep things in sync, or dedupe stuff. Heroku is a great way to do that. So in our case, that's what we had. We had a number of orgs. This is just a sampling of the orgs we were trying to integrate. And this is, again, a common pattern across org integration. So where we're kind of moving is to get rid of this DMZ part and make it fully cloud as we move to Elasticsearch. We're working with Elasticsearch to get a private space version of that as well. Yeah, these are the things I mentioned before. Okay. And so, yeah, if we have questions and answers, I find that sometimes answering questions is more interesting than me sitting up here blabbing. If people have questions about how we do this or concerns about how they're doing things and how they might leverage Heroku to utilize that or to get past those troubles. Yes?
So,
Oh.
Those tools might be really useful for customers who have multiple Salesforce orgs. When we have releasing them?
Have what now?
Releasing those tools for merging data from multiple Salesforce orgs.
So Connect, what's that? Oh, okay, sorry. The question was, these tools could be useful for people who have multiple orgs and they're trying to bring that information together. Have we released these tools? And some of these we've built ourselves, but most of them are built on the things that you could use today, like Connect. So Connect, you could have multiple orgs and it'll come in and the difference will be it'll have a different schema in Postgres per org, but then you can do your unions across that and now all of a sudden you get all that data from all those different orgs. And then you can do things like dedupe that data, clean it up, massage it in whatever way, and then pump it back in. Which is kind of how the AI stuff works. It'll pull it out, it does all its analysis, and then pumps it back into the org so you find out what that new opportunity or lead or whatever. So.
regarding single sign-on, Heroku has its own single sign-on, or it's using Salesforce single sign-on?
Actually, both. So Heroku has its own single sign-on, but it's for managing Heroku. It's not for the app that's inside of Heroku. But so what we do is we have Heroku's SSO for if you're going to log into Heroku and manage the applications. But if you're a user, then it's using Salesforce's single sign-on.
So it's the support SAML for both managing the app, and
Yes.
then using the single sign-on SAML with
Yes,
Salesforce?
except you'd be, in this case, you'd be using Heroku's for the management pieces, admin pieces, and then you'd use Salesforce for the user identity part.
Thank you.
Like with Salesforce development, deploying it to other orgs through either Ant migration tool or
Right.
change that, it's kind of very slow.
Yes.
So do you guys currently use anything for your own Salesforce releases, the Heroku build and deployment and continuous integration, or?
So have you seen the Salesforce DX stuff?
No, I
You
need
might,
to.
okay, I was going to say you might find interest there because that's kind of bringing that continuous delivery bits to the org portion. For the non-org portion, like the node apps and stuff, we definitely heavily use continuous integration. And that was kind of the flow pipeline. So we'll run all our tests and stuff. Actually, in this case, it was using Travis. So Travis CI was behind the scenes, and then it would go into that pull request if the tests all pass, and then you could advance it throughout the pipeline. So Salesforce DX is bringing that type of flow to on-org Salesforce development. So I would definitely look at that if you do that. Because I know previously there wasn't much for that.
Oh, okay.
You had Ant and Jenkins.
Okay, great. So it's only for internal Salesforce, or is it going to be available as a
No, it's available.
solution for both?
Yeah, it's available.
So Heroku Connect, can we use it for our interfaces within your Salesforce org with any other enterprise applications?
Do you mean the data from it?
Yeah.
Yes, you could use OData. So you could have it living in that Postgres database and expose that data. So you could either sync the data and have it that way, or if you wanted to just live there and only expose it, then you could do it through like an OData interface.
But so first you will have to get from your enterprise system into Postgres first.
Yes, if you wanted to do it that way. There would be a couple ways. So if you wanted to keep the data in sync between your Salesforce org and Postgres, then you could use Connect. If you just had some data, maybe it was from the front-end website, and you just wanted to expose it, then without Connect, you could just use the OData portions with Postgres.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any others?
Does this Heroku Connect kind of make use of streaming API, or what kinds of APIs does
It does. It'll use the SOAP bulk or streaming. And then one interesting bit is that if you're using the SOAP API, and it depends on how you're configured in the interface, then if you're using the SOAP API, then it won't count against your API limits, which is handy. So if you find yourself running into API limits through doing some integration, then you might look at Connect, because then it won't hit those limits. You'll sort of get them for free.
Okay.
Those over here.
I've got two questions, but when you sync the data back and forth, is it taking only certain fields back and forth, or does it change the whole record at a time?
You can select the mapping. So you may think, oh, I want account, but only want the address and the name or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could select to just have those.
And if in my Heroku app I update just the name, does just the name go back,
Yes.
or is it
Yeah.
updating the
Yeah,
record?
just the name goes back.
Okay, and then second question, with the multiple org in single sign-on. So if I try to do single sign-on, but I have two orgs that I'm connecting, how do we know which org I authenticate to? Because I've got users in org 1, I pull the data in. I've got users in org 2, I pull the data in. I'd like them to sign in with their own Salesforce ID from different orgs.
And the user's not available in both?
No.
So let's see. So with the single sign-on in that case, the way it works for ours at least, we're configured to one particular IDP. And so it's whoever's in there is how it's gonna, you could do it at your application level, and you could say, well, if they're coming from, maybe if they have different domains or whatever it is, if they're coming from this domain, use this one, this domain, use this one,
Okay.
then you could implement it at that level. But in our case, everybody goes through one common IDP.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any others? You may get some time back in your life. It went a little faster than I expected. I can get wordy, so I thought I was leaving more time.
Salesforce DX features which you just explained, so will it be available as a part of your within Salesforce or is it?
Sorry, I missed the first part. What was the first part?
The Salesforce DX features which you just spoke about.
Oh, yeah, right.
With the pipelines and flow. So will it be available within the Salesforce, within your org, or is it going to be a separate package?
It's that I'm not sure. I would ask the Salesforce DX folks. I think it gets displayed from the Salesforce side. I'm not sure what that ends up looking like. I know it ends up looking like pipelines. But I don't know if it's just part of things that are, part of the new tooling. That part I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
What is the role of Redis that you use in this architect?
What's the, did you say how many rows? Like in a...
Redis, what do you use it for?
Oh, Redis. It depends in some cases. So in the case of Concierge, Redis is, it's queuing for indexing articles. So we'll know where we are in indexing. So the way the search works is, right now it works through the GSA, but will be the Elasticsearch. But anyway, those things get queued up in Redis and shared for that in memory. And then it goes out to look at the knowledge articles in the various orgs. And so then there's case owners, they're queue owners on the backside of those cases. So that if we see one that gets stale, which also that stuff gets captured in Redis. So if somebody says this article is stale, this article is old, then we can grab it and then we can pick that up and then put a case on the queue for whoever owns the article for them to go and update it. So in that case, so caching data, session data, in the case of Trailhead, like so any of the session data, any transient data works pretty well for Redis, or anything you need fast access to that you're going to churn through.
So Heroku have any kind of security things like users, profiles, those kind of things?
Yes, so we have fine-grained access controls. So if you're in an organization, like so if you're using Heroku Enterprise, then your admins will be able to select, this guy can't see this app. There's several roles, they're kind of roles that you can select to say, okay, they can deploy apps and they can view logs, or they can only view logs, or they can only look at the app, but they can't view settings. So in that case, but they don't map up to like LDAP or something.
Okay, because in a Salesforce we have ability to give a object level permission and then those
Right.
things, right? In the postage database, you have a lot of tables, right? So we are going to sync between Salesforce and then postage app. So if we want to restrict some of the users in the postage database level, do we have ability?
Yeah. So two things, I guess. One, it's worth noting that whatever API user you're using for Connect, so it'll go through an OAuth flow when you're setting up Connect, and whatever that user has access to is what's going to be visible to Connect, to sync, so you can limit it there. The downside of that is syncs are going to take longer because it's going to be running through permission checks on the org. But if your question is more of once the data gets there, how do I limit who can see it there? That right now we're working on database roles so that you could have users that could only see, only read things or something like that. But that's still coming. Otherwise, I think you'd have to do it at a different layer. You could expose it through data clips or something. It depends on what your data is and how you're trying to restrict it.
Okay, thank you.
Coming back to the same question, can we sync the same roles and profiles, whatever users are there, to Heroku?
Not in the way you're thinking. So you could sync some of the data, but you wouldn't get sort of the profile. You wouldn't have like user X with his profile, and then he ends up with user X on this side. I would love to see us do LDAP so that you could match your OUs so that it looked the same.
Do you have any sort of customers who are using the Heroku Connect as kind of a basis for enhancing Salesforce reporting?
Yes, and that would be kind of like, well, I mean, we do that. So kind of like with the cross-org, multi-org reporting, we do the same thing so they'll generate their reports using Postgres. So they pull the data out, manipulate it more with Postgres, and then generate reports from that. And if you've ever used something called Looker, it's a pretty good way to manipulate and graph that data. And it's basically using Postgres or SQL queries to do that. So it's very useful for doing it that way.
Great, thanks.